Okay, so before I just run through the contents of the webinar, I think it's just worth saying that you may already know HS2 Limited are currently developing and constructing the UK's new high-speed rail network, and work on phase 1 of that project has already started, and that runs from London to the West Midlands. The work itself includes a major ecology programme and a green corridor. Now, the HS2 Woodland Fund sits alongside that and supports the ecology programme that's in place and offers funding for restoring plantations on ancient woodland sites and creating new native woodland. And we'll be talking through those two elements of the fund in greater detail as we move through. So the webinar itself will also look at how the scheme will operate, and there have been some changes to the previous year in how we will run the scheme. And we will recap, as I just mentioned, the funding itself, so what we have on offer for PAWS Restoration and native creation, although that broadly remains the same as before. Now, just before we begin in earnest and I hand you over to Sam to take you through context and the key dates, it's worth noting that you may have seen correspondence from us that we would open the fund on the 11th of March, which was Monday just gone. Unfortunately, that hasn't been possible due to a minor delay arising from issues around finalising the contract between HS2 and the Forestry Commission. Resolving those contractual issues are minor, and it will not take us long to complete that work. We aim to open the fund shortly. I can't give you an exact date, but what I would say is announcements will be made via the Forestry Commission e-alert and also will be placed on the gov.uk page. So please watch out for an e-alert, and as I say, the fund itself will be opening shortly. I'll hand you over to Sam.
Hi, so I'll take everyone through context and key dates and how the way that we process applications will change slightly this year. So, as I'm sure you know, the HS2 Woodland Fund opened early last year in 2018 with £1 million to commit PAWS Restoration and native woodland creation scheme within 25 miles of the phase 1 route, and we did that on essentially a first come, first served basis. Now, in 2018, we had a significant number of applications and expressions of interest over and above the budget that we had available. So to ensure that moving forward the highest quality proposals are supported, we'll be ranking applications. So from now, we will be allocating a further £4 million across 4 planting seasons. So from next winter, 2019-20, up until 2022-23, and that will be on a competitive basis. So we'll be aiming to allocate roughly £1 million per planting season, and we will be scoring applications against each other. You might have an application on the reserve list from 2018. If you do, you'll be contacted when we open directly by email, and we will ask you if you want to undertake the work that was in your 2018 application next winter. If you do, then you can have your application put into the first application assessment cycle, and I'll tell you what that means in a moment. What that means is your application will be scored and ranked against all those that we receive brand new in the first application assessment cycle. It may be that you've moved on and you've gone into a different grant scheme and the work has already been undertaken. Or it might be that you want to choose to submit in a later cycle. So you want to skip this one, that's fine, but you'll be responsible for doing that yourself. So we will automatically put applications into the first round if that's what you want. Otherwise, it will be back to you to submit a new application later. On the other hand, if you submitted an expression of interest to us, so not a full application, we will contact you directly and email you a blank 2019 application form to apply for funding to undertake work next winter when we open. I should have said, for those on the reserve list, we will transpose your application from the 2018 version into the 2019 version for you. And if you want to take it ahead, there'll be just a couple of extra questions for you to answer in the new format. But most of the work will be done by us. Okay, so as Sam said, we will be opening this month. It shouldn't be too much longer. Applications, as before, will be accepted year-round, so we won't close down at any point. All capital funds must be committed and claimed by the end of 2022-23. And as I mentioned, from now on, we'll be running competitive application assessment cycles, and they'll be roughly quarterly. So there'll be 4 per year. And in any given application assessment cycle, there'll be 1 planting season available. So work can't be split across 2 seasons, and we think that that's reasonable given that there's no rush now to be the earliest to apply, and because schemes tend to be small enough under HS2 Woodland Fund for this to be practical. So the advice would be to plan your submission in advance, and I'll show you in a moment which planting seasons are available when. So a bit more on what these assessment cycles are and how they all work. So we'll have 4 of these per year, and each one has 4 stages to it. So we start with applications, so we receive those all year, but we batch them 4 times per year. So at the start of an application cycle, we look at all of the applications we've received, and we rank them based on their score. So we'll have 4 application deadlines throughout the year. I'll show you those in a moment. So in the first 4 weeks between, after an application deadline, we will gather all of these applications that we've received and take them to our review panel. The review panel will rank applications against one another by their score, and that will be a self-score that you do as part of the application form. And then funding will be allocated to the highest scoring applications according to the budget that we have. Over the next 12 weeks, Woodland Officers will be assigned to applications that the review panel selected, so those that scored the highest, and the Woodland Officers will work with these applicants to develop their proposals up to final application. That's up to 12 weeks. It may not take as long as that, but that is the amount of time that Woodland Officers will have per application. Then in the final up to 6 weeks at the most, it will be time to send out agreement offers. So most applications will be approved at this point by local field managers, but the top 20% of final applications in terms of value, so the 20% most expensive schemes, will be approved by the panel, and that's why it's up to 6 weeks. So those ones that need to be approved by the panel will take a little bit longer potentially to get an agreement offer out. But if your application is being approved locally by a field manager, it could be significantly less than 6 weeks for that final stage. So these dates are to be confirmed, but at the moment this is what the plan is looking like for 2019-20. So we've got 4 application deadlines, the end of March, early July, mid-October and late January next year. In each of those 4 cycles there will be 1 planting season available. You can see there that the second one, with a July deadline, there's a choice. So you can choose between 2019-20 or 2020-21, but we would prefer 2019-20 applications up until July. But if it's a case that 2019-20 isn't feasible for your project, for example due to its size, then we will accept a 2020-21 application. And then according to those cycles, we will impose deadlines for sending out agreements where reasonable. So if your application is held up for something that's outside of our control, then these deadlines won't apply, but in general, if you apply by the end of March, then you'll have an agreement offer by late August. If you apply by the 5th of July, you'll have an agreement offer by late November, and so on. So, applications are welcome within 25 miles around the HS2 Phase 1 line from London to the West Midlands. That hasn't changed from last year. The map on the screen there, I'm not sure how well you can see it, but it has Woodland Officer names on there. You can find Woodland Officer contact details on gov.uk at the Forestry Commission page. No work is allowed in the safeguarding zone. So you can see, I think it's in green there, that's the safeguarding zone. We won't accept any applications in there. If you have an application that's high quality and slightly outside of the 25-mile zone, we may consider it for funding, but I'd say that's up to about half a mile outside of the zone. We may consider those. Okay, I'll hand back over to Sam now to go through what the grant funds and principles around eligibility and other requirements.
Thanks, Sam. So, as before, the aims and objectives of the fund haven't changed, and the two components that grant support will be available to fund also haven't changed, and they remain as payments for restoring plantations on ancient woodland sites, and also planting of new native woodland. And I'll go through a bit more information about the criteria and thresholds around those two components in the next few slides. Just before I move on, one point to make clear is you don't have to apply for either or. You can have a mixed application that includes both PAWS restoration and native woodland creation on your land. Okay, so for PAWS restoration, as you can see on the slide, the funding available will support the restocking of foul coops of woodland that's dominated, and that means over 50% by non-native species, and then replacing those with native species. We also offer payments for protecting those newly restocked areas with fencing or tubes as appropriate, but we can also extend that out to the wider PAWS woodland where appropriate. What that means is final decisions will be at the discretion of the Forestry Commission and informed by a site visit from a woodland officer once you have moved through the initial application stages. If you are ranked highly enough, you'll be allocated a woodland officer who will come and do a site visit, and at that point they will review the protection measures that you've selected and make sure that they are appropriate. And where we are supporting protection across the wider PAWS woodland, it has to be required to ensure the successful establishment of the restocked trees. Just one other point I'd like to make on this slide is that applications will not be supported where the falling has already taken place and the HS2 application doesn't represent an improved environmental outcome. And what that means is if you've already fouled the trees and you have a falling licence with restock conditions that require you to replant that area with broadleaves, then the HS2 Woodland Fund wouldn't be available to you. If, however, you've already undertaken falling and your conditions state that you can restock with conifers, then you can apply to the HS2 Woodland Fund to change that to broadleaves, because we would see an improved environmental outcome through the use of the grant money. Some more information about PAWS restoration. The payments that are available are capital only. What that means is, unlike woodland creation payments, which have a maintenance element, there isn't an equivalent for PAWS restoration. The payment rates are at 100% of standard costs, and you can see some examples in the table on screen. This is just a snapshot. The full list is much longer, and it's available online and is embedded within the application form. Some of these items, if you're familiar with countryside stewardship, may look quite comparable, that's because they are. So the tree planting rate, for example, is the same as countryside stewardship. However, it's been uplifted to represent a payment of 100% of the cost of planting a tree. Countryside stewardship will pay out at about an 80% intervention rate. HS2 does have additional capital items, though, that are bespoke to the scheme. So things like squirrel control you wouldn't find in countryside stewardship. So there are items that are unique to the HS2 fund. And as I say, if you want to see the full list, please go to the HS2 Woodland Fund webpage. So moving on to the second component, which is native woodland creation. Here there's funding available to create and protect new native woodland, particularly where this will expand or connect existing ancient woodland. That's important to note. Now, you can have standalone blocks of woodland, but you will receive higher points if you are expanding or connecting with existing ancient woodland. And I'll talk through the thresholds in the next few slides. So with woodland creation, as with PAWS, there are a whole range of capital items available that are going to be up on our webpage and in the application form, and they are paid at 100% of standard costs. However, with woodland creation, unlike PAWS, there is a maintenance element where you can get £200 per hectare per annum, but that payment will be grouped together and made in 2 batches. So you'll receive the money in year 5 and year 10 of your agreement. Okay, so we're just going to pause here and see if we've received any questions. I mentioned at the start that you're on mute, so if there are any questions that you would like to ask on anything that we've just run through, if you could please raise those as a question using the participant feedback function, which is the box which I believe should be in the bottom left of your screen. If you just type your question in there and it'll pop up, and we will endeavour to give you an answer. I actually don't think we have any at the moment. Okay, one has just come in. It's a question about the 4 million, how it will be allocated, whether it covers both native woodland and PAWS restoration. The answer is yes, it does. So the total funding available is £4 million, and that will be used for PAWS restoration and also native woodland creation. Okay, if there aren't any more questions, we will, sorry, another one has just popped up. Okay, there's a question that's come through about amending existing agreements, and we're actually about to get into that in the next section. So if we can hold that question, and hopefully we will answer it through the presentation. However, when we next stop for questions, if you feel that hasn't been answered, please raise it again. Okay. So I'm now going to talk through the thresholds and caps that apply for the Woodland Fund. These should be familiar. They haven't changed since the last time we ran the scheme, but worth recapping. So you can see on screen at the moment we have both the minimum application size and the maximum application size for woodland creation and PAWS restoration. The area for woodland creation, where it is connecting or expanding existing ancient woodland, is 1 hectare. And we have arrived at that figure because the planting must still be of sufficient size to create a viable unit that will develop into woodland. So we won't allow applications below 1 hectare. Now, if the woodland isn't connecting or extending an existing ancient woodland and it's just a standalone block, that threshold goes up to 5 hectares. You can see that the minimum application size PAWS is 0.5 of a hectare, and the minimum falling coop is 0.1 of a hectare. Now, just on the maximum application sizes, for woodland creation, for both connecting or extending woodland, it's 25 hectares, and the same applies for the standalone woodlands. They're also 25 hectares. For PAWS, there's no maximum application area, but we envisage between 0.1 and 2 of a hectare for individual falling coops. And there's a bit of text that explains where we might allow larger individual coops to be considered. That's in situations such as where there might be an urgent need to remove seed trees, such as western hemlock, or where a whole ancient woodland site has been converted to conifer and there are a few ancient semi-natural woodland remnant features surviving on the site, then we might allow a larger application area to go forward. Okay, so on stocking densities for creation, it's 1,600 to 2,500 stems per hectare, and for PAWS, it's 1,100 to 2,500 stems per hectare. Now, higher stocking densities may be considered. 2,500 is the maximum for which you can receive funding. So if you want to exceed that number, you can put it in your application form. It will be considered, but it wouldn't be funded. So that's the maximum we will fund. On open ground, you can see there the threshold for creation is between 5 and 20%, in keeping with UKFS. For PAWS, what we have said is clearance should be the exception, but can be justified for a handful of reasons, such as building a road or track to facilitate management. Now, the reason it should be an exception, I think, will be fairly intuitive. That's because it would involve losing woodland communities that have potentially taken hundreds of years to develop. So it's not something we would like to see unless it is critical, as I say, for the management of that woodland. So just a bit on species selection and species mix. It's becoming fairly standard practice now on grants that are administered by the Forestry Commission for applicants to be required to use the Forestry Commission Ecological Site Classification tool. That's an online tool that's freely available, and it can help inform your species selection by considering the future scenarios that factor in climate change projections. You can get help from the Forestry Commission in using this tool if you're not familiar with it. On species mix, the next slide will show you a list of species that can be funded, and that list will be available on the application form itself. A couple of key things to note. The list includes honorary broadleaves and woody shrubs. They can only be up to 20% of the planting mix. For woodland creation, there is a little bit more to consider for PAWS. So for PAWS restoration, if you're using honorary broadleaves, they have to be present on site, and up to 20% may be replanted, or the percentage present at the time of falling, up to a maximum of 20%. For woody shrubs, it's the same as creation. You can have up to 20%. And in line with UKFS, no single species for either woodland creation or PAWS restoration can be more than 75% of the planting mix. Okay, so if we go on to the next slide, you can see there a list of native trees and shrubs that can be paid for under the Woodland Fund. This list is available in the application form and online to inform your decisions as you go through the application process. There are also 3 native shrubs that can be included but won't receive funding. And there are equally 3 honorary native species that can be included but will receive funding. And again, as before, all of these are included on the application form for ease of reference. Okay, so the last slide about thresholds and caps. We have got a funding cap in place For woodland creation, it's £8,500 per hectare gross. That includes all of the capital items for planting the woodland and protecting it, but it excludes leaky woody dams, and also it excludes the maintenance payment that I mentioned earlier of £200 per hectare per annum. For PAWS Restoration, the limit is £4,000 per hectare on the net area of restocking, but that limit only includes the cost of planting. So in addition to that, you can have payments for protection measures. It's also important that you're aware that there are some additional requirements on applications for restoring PAWS, and that is that you need to have in place a UKFS compliant FC approved woodland management plan before you can be offered an agreement under the HS2 Woodland Fund. For woodland creation, you need to have a woodland creation plan, but that's embedded within the application form. You don't have to have that already in place and approved. You can do that through the application process itself. Okay, so we again have got to a point where we're pausing for questions. I realised I said that in that section we were going to talk about what happens if you have an existing agreement on your land, and we haven't done so. I got ahead of myself. It's actually coming up in the next section, so please still hold your fire on that one. But let's just see if we've had any questions on what we've just talked through. So we have a question on the species list, and it's around Scots pine. Whether an alternative conifer could be considered. I just want to make it clear, conifers aren't funded through the HS2 Woodland Fund. It's broadleaves only. So I know we flashed that species list up pretty quick, and sorry if I didn't cover that key point, but it's about native broadleaves, so no funding available for conifers. A very good follow-up question. You obviously were looking at that species list. What about yew and juniper then? Well, I would need to defer to my biodiversity colleagues to give you the full answer about that species list, but it's all hinged on what's appropriate for ancient woodland, either restoring plantations on ancient woodland sites or creating new native woodland, and it's in line with FC policy around that. Any others? No. All right. In that case, we will move on. So in this section, I'm going to talk through who can apply for the fund and what happens if you have an existing agreement on the land in question. So who can apply? Well, again, this is as before. We haven't made any changes to this. Sam mentioned and showed a map of a 25-mile buffer around the HS2 Phase 1 route. That map is available online. Your application needs to sit within it. We will consider applications that have scored highly and of a high standard that sit on or near the edge of the 25-mile boundary, but that will be at our discretion. So if you're just outside, I would say to you, put forward an application. It will be considered, but there is certainly no guarantee of it moving forward, and due to the competitive nature of the scheme, it will come down to how you score and rank amongst the rest of the applications received within that application period. Just a point to note, as before, Crown bodies and non-departmental public bodies are not eligible for the fund. Other public bodies, such as local authorities and national parks, can apply and are eligible for capital items, but will not receive the £200 per hectare per year for woodland creation maintenance. So it's just the maintenance payments that local authorities and national parks would not receive. A point to note, the fund no longer operates under EU state aid de minimis. We have had an approved state aid notification come through from the European Commission which covers this grant scheme. De minimis itself limits the amount of funding an individual or an organisation can receive in a 3-year period, and previously we had to apply that limit to the HS2 Woodland Fund, but no longer. So really this is not something you will need to concern yourself with because we are operating outside of de minimis. Okay, existing agreements on the land. A couple of points to note here. The first one is about the basic payment scheme. So if you receive BPS, those payments can be retained for the whole agreement period, and we have an operations note, number 42, available on our webpage, and I would encourage you to read that. It gives you full and thorough details about retaining BPS. A couple of points to flag with you. There are eligibility rules that apply to retaining BPS. Landowners can retain it if they use the land with entitlement to claim SPS back in 2008. Assuming you meet that criteria and you have a HS2 agreement in place, once you've received your HS2 agreement, you will need to notify the RPA of a land use change by completing an RLE1 form, but all of this information is supplied with your HS2 agreement, so you are reminded of this at the point you get your agreement. Environmental stewardship and countryside stewardship, we have slightly changed our approach from previous years. What we're saying is that the land in question must either be removed or in the process of being removed from environmental stewardship or countryside stewardship agri-environment schemes before applying to the HS2 Woodland Fund. And then also, if your proposal is already subject to a current countryside stewardship woodland creation grant, countryside stewardship higher tier woodland or woodland carbon fund application, we will not accept it under the HS2 Woodland Fund. And also, if your proposal is already subject to an existing but unclaimed agreement under any of the above grant schemes, it will not be accepted under the HS2 Woodland Fund. Okay, so we'll just go back to the questions. The one that came through earlier. If you have an existing mid-tier countryside stewardship agreement in place for grassland on the proposed planting area, can you amend that to allow new planting? Okay, I mean, I can't really give specific examples of when countryside stewardship can and cannot be amended. My understanding is the agreement holder has the right to come out of their agreement early, but penalties can be applied, and as Natural England run that scheme, you would have to raise that inquiry direct with Natural England. But yes, please be aware that there are implications to closing an agreement early, and they can be financial. And that's really what we want people to be aware of before they apply to the HS2 Woodland Fund. We have seen over the last 18 months a number of applications drop out because the applicant decides they do not want to continue with withdrawing their land from an existing grant scheme due to the penalties that they will incur. Now, that has consequently led to money having to be reallocated, firstly, but secondly, a great deal of time on both our behalf and on the behalf of the applicant and most likely their agent being lost, having spent months working up an application that then cannot progress because the land will not be taken out of an existing scheme. And that is why up front we now want applicants to be fully aware of the implication of applying to the fund and taking on a HS2 agreement and what that will mean if they are in environmental stewardship or a countryside stewardship agri-environment scheme. Okay, another question here. Do the rules around removal from countryside stewardship stand for PAWS Restoration as well as woodland creation? So yes, they do. Basically, the HS2 Woodland Fund is not compatible with those existing schemes, so you cannot receive payments from the HS2 Woodland Fund on top of payments from Countryside Stewardship or Environmental Stewardship. And that's why you have to exit either of those agreements, if you're in one, prior to getting a HS2 Woodland Fund agreement, because they are not compatible. Okay, another question has come through. If you're in Environmental Stewardship or Countryside Stewardship, before you remove the land, would it be possible to have the initial scoring decision from the panel? Yes. So we aren't saying you have to take the land out of an existing agreement at the point of application, because I would accept at that stage you don't have reassurance that you will move forward through the HS2 Woodland Fund. What we want is some consideration of the implication of removing your land and an understanding of the penalties that will apply to you at the point of applying to the fund. You can apply without having taken your land out of an existing agreement. What will need to happen in the 12 weeks where you're working with a Woodland Officer, if you've been successful through scoring and ranking, you'll need to continue that dialogue with Natural England and have, before we offer you an agreement, remove the land. Okay, I think that's the end of the questions. So we will move on. Thank you very much.
Okay, how to apply then? So to make an application to the HS2 Woodland Fund, you need to complete the 2019 application form. The 2018 application form has been withdrawn on gov.uk, so it says very clearly that it's no longer in use. The 2019 application form will be uploaded to gov.uk when we open, so look out for that e-alert from us. For a creation application, you need to submit 2 application maps, and I'll show you some examples in a moment. So we'll need a planting map and a concept map. For PAWS applications, we just need 1 map, so a PAWS Restoration work area map, and again I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. And we've already mentioned that a woodland condition assessment is also required for PAWS applications. So this must be completed and submitted with your final application, but if you're unable to do a woodland condition assessment yourself at the point of applying, then your Woodland Officer can assist with this when they come and do their site visit. All applications need to be self-scored, so the self-scoring form is incorporated in the application form, and as Sam said, the Woodland Creation Plan for creation applications is also incorporated into the application form. We prefer to get our applications by email to the mailbox that's shown on screen now. So your final application then, after the 12 weeks spent with your Woodland Officer, if you were successful at ranking, will end up with, for both types of applications, a final application form with all figures agreed with the Woodland Officer and final. The creation is those 2 maps, the planting map and the concept map, and then all consents and consultation responses. So we will expect you, as part of completing the Woodland Creation Plan, to give us evidence of all of the consultation that you've done with all the relevant stakeholders and any consents that you need, for example, if there's a SSSI. For PAWS, it's the form, the map, the woodland condition assessment, and again, any consents and consultation responses. So for a woodland creation application, if you have ES or CS on the land, it needs to be removed by the end of this 12-week period. So when it comes to submitting your final application in these cases, we will need written confirmation of the withdrawal of the land from the existing agreement at that point to form part of your final application. So just a little bit on what the application form looks like. It's quite similar to the 2018 version. We'll update this application form once a year, so you need to make sure that you're using the right one by checking gov.uk. Withdrawn versions of the application form will be clearly marked as withdrawn. The first sheet really on the application form where you need to give us details of your proposal is part 3 about the land. So here we're asking for basic details about the area that you're including, but also information on any designations and any current grant agreements. So we need to know that up front to check whether your application is eligible and to flag any issues that would need to be talked through with the Woodland Officer at a later date. The land does not need to be registered with the RPA, but we do need to know the work area in the application using standard compartment and sub-compartment references. So we're not asking you for RLR parcel references, basically we're asking you for compartment references. This is a screenshot of the PAWS Restoration tab. There's also a Woodland Creation tab. This is where you give us all the details of the capital items that you're applying for, the species that you'll be planting, what their predicted yield class is, and so on. That will be automatically populating parts of this, and then the summary at the end of the application will draw from the information you put in here. So it's important to make sure that your entries here are accurate. These are a couple of screenshots from the Woodland Creation Plan. So it's very similar to the Woodland Creation Plan that's in CS Woodland Creation Annex 2. So if you're familiar with that, then you'll be pretty familiar with this. Basically, what we're doing here is asking you for a plan for the first 10 years of your new woodland, and we're also negating the need for a separate environmental impact assessment inquiry for your project. And we do that by gathering all of the environmental information about your site that we require to make that regulatory decision. So it's important to gather data and consult relevant stakeholders early on, ideally before you come to us with an application. This is the self-scoring form. So scores for HS2 Woodland Fund applications are based on location and then the features of your project. So the closer you are to the phase 1 route, the more points you get. And for PAWS, it's about addressing threats. So if you address more threats in your woodland, then you get a higher score. So for this reason, we'd recommend doing a woodland creation assessment before you apply, if it's possible, to inform your score. But support will be available from a Woodland Officer for those who get through initial ranking. Then for creation, it's about the benefits that your woodland will bring, and particularly in terms of reversing habitat fragmentation. Scores will be checked, and if you're unsuccessful at panel ranking, then you're free to apply in another assessment cycle. You're not ruled out. You don't get through first time. This is the only new sheet in the new application form. It's a work and claim schedule. There's very little input required of you here, but it summarises when you'll be doing all of your work and when you'll be claiming. So it's really important for our forecasting that you choose a claim month in this part of the application form. So we want you to know enough about your plans for this project that you'll be able to say when you'll have completed it and will be claiming. Okay, so some example maps that we'd be looking to see. This is an example of the Woodland Creation planting map. So it's basically how, what, and where. So what's the area, what's the species, and how is it going to be planted. So in this example, you can see that they've given planting lines following contours. We don't have hard and fast rules about this, but it needs to be an appropriate scale. So for the size of applications that we're getting, that's probably 1 to 2,500 or 1 to 5,000 will be appropriate for most schemes, and ideally they'll be based on an OS map. But what this planting map needs to show in particular is where the trees are going and what the species will be. The concept map is more about the design of your woodland and the location of all of the capital items that you're paying for. So this is the map if you're applying for woodland creation that will become your agreement map, and it's what the inspector will use when they go out on site to check that everything is where it should be. So it's really important that you are accurate here about where your fences, gates, and so on are going and where the open space is going. This is also more important because of the way that we do our business here now at the Forestry Commission. So when we consult on woodland creation applications, we need to accurately map the area of the woodland. So we need an accurate map from you at the point of application. And then finally, this is an example of the PAWS Restoration work area map. So this is just showing where the restocking is taking place and where all the capital items are that you're applying for. So it's pretty simple. The compartments are marked and they match the application form, so it's easy to see what is going where. So some key points on mapping. Keep your maps clean and clear. So if a map is cluttered or illegible or it has things missing, we will return it to you and that will slow down the application process for you. So make the admin officer's job easier. We need those accurate boundaries for public consultation, like I said. Show the location of all capital items. So because this application map is going to become an agreement map, it means that it's going to be used by inspectors. So it needs to show everything that's included in your application. And then the following are just sort of general rules of thumb for any kind of application map that you might submit to the Forestry Commission. So central grid reference, north sign, scale, some sort of identifier that corresponds to the application, so probably the woodland name, compartment references that also correspond to the application, and then map numbers if you're submitting multiple maps. And finally, some golden rules that I'm sure you all know, but they're always worth repeating. So the first rule of thumb is plan ahead. So submit your application in plenty of time. Look at the timescales that we'll be publishing on gov.uk. They'll be very clear. Work backwards from when you'll get an agreement to when you need to get an application to us. Never begin work before you've accepted a formal offer of grant in writing from us. This is really key. We won't fund any work that's required under a regulation or another duty. So, for example, woodland creation applications that involve planting that's already required under a Section 106 agreement, we won't fund. For PAWS applications, I think Sam's already mentioned this, that if you have a felling licence, the felling has already been undertaken and the restocking conditions already specify a change from exotic species to native broadleaves, then we won't accept that because we wouldn't be incentivising any change there or investing in an improved environmental outcome, because once you've already felled, you're already required to do that restocking with broadleaves. And then finally, if you're applying for an item, show it on your map and check for any additional submission requirements associated with it. So we put item specifications on the scheme's webpage. If you're applying for an item, just check if you need any additional permissions or evidence for those.
Okay, so just one final slide. If your application is successful at the point of ranking, a woodland officer will arrange a site visit to discuss your application. So this is the point where, if you're in an existing agreement with environmental stewardship or countryside stewardship, we would encourage you to take that forward and remove your land from that existing agreement, because at the point where you've been successful through ranking and you have a woodland officer allocated and a site visit arranged, that means funding has been earmarked for you from the HS2 Woodland Fund, and all being well, assuming everything can be resolved, you will get an agreement. When you meet your woodland officer, you will talk through the woodland condition survey that you've submitted with your PAWS application. The woodland officer will help you if you want to review that condition survey, and if you felt unsure during its completion, I would just point out that there are examples, including supporting information, available to help you on our web pages, and you can also get in touch if you do need advice in filling out that information. Okay, so we'll stop again. This is the end of the webinar, so if you have any final questions you would like to ask us, if you could please raise them through the chat function. I can see one has been raised. Someone has asked if we will have examples of successful projects. We are going to be publishing case studies of projects that have been funded already. They will be going online shortly with the relaunch of the scheme. Okay, there aren't any other questions coming through. We'll just move on to the next slide, which gives you the web link for gov.uk, where you can find out more information about the HS2 Woodland Fund. That will be updated as soon as we go live, and as I mentioned, we'll also make those announcements via our Forestry Commission e-alert. There's a question about the consultation process. So the Forestry Commission will be responsible for the statutory consultation on these applications that come through, and we'll make decisions around whether or not we need to wait for a response from a given consultee. We normally allow 28 days, but there are instances where consultation will exceed that. What we wouldn't do, of course, is move forward to an agreement if we felt that the work could be to the detriment of other environmental features on the site. We have a duty of care there, and we need to ensure we are being responsible, so we may not enforce that 1 month period for a consultation response to be received if we feel there is a risk that can require mitigation. A question here about the woodland management plan. So we said earlier that if you're applying for restoring PAWS Woodland, you need to have an approved woodland management plan in place. That woodland management plan would be for the forest management unit. That might be your whole holding. It depends on how your holding is organised, but it would be for a wider area than just your PAWS Woodland.
So that woodland management plan can be approved in principle by the Forestry Commission at the point at which you apply, but it must have been formally approved at the end of the 12-week process with the Woodland Officer if you're successful at ranking. And that's part of that is because we want to see how it fits in with your wider woodland management, and we'll be using maps from your final woodland management plan to inform that.
Okay. Just pause for a moment longer in case someone is furiously typing. Okay, we haven't received any further questions. Thank you very much for giving up your time to dial in. We look forward to receiving your applications. Hopefully you're excited about the relaunch of the fund. We certainly are. We think it's a fantastic offer, and I'm sure we can do some great PAWS restoration and new native woodland creation through it. This webinar has been recorded, and a link will be made available on gov.uk if you wish to view it back or share it with colleagues. Thank you again.